All right, guys, welcome to A.F.C. Curtis. I'm your host, Curtis, and I'm super excited to have not only any coach, but the coach, the inaugural coach of the Canadian Premier League, right here, Cavalry FC, head coach and general manager, Tommy Wheeldon Jr. How's it going today, Tommy?
I'm good. Just been back in from some Christmas shopping as the off season and ready to play my husband and father role as well as the other roles you've just given me. So it's a nice nice time of the year to be able to now look back on what a good 2020 launch year was.
Yeah, no, and that's what I know we're gonna do today in today's video here is, we're gonna kind of look back at you specifically at a little bit at the start here, your career leading up to Cavalry, your time at Cavalry, just kind of also a review of Cavalry FC's 2019 season, as well as even for the CPL and maybe what's ahead too for 2020. So the first thing here is, you had a bit of a playing career there. Started in England. You finished up in Calgary with the old Calgary Storm. My big question for you when I saw your resume there is what led you? Well, obviously your father was the coach of the Calgary Storm at the time when you joined them in the early 2000s. But like, how did he sell it to you to come to Canada of all places, like of Calgary too?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I left school at 16. I took an apprenticeship with Swindon Town, and that was 95 to 97. And it was two of the best years of my life. Back in the old school where you'd clean the boots of the first team and then you'd go out to train alongside them. And if you're fortunate enough, you got selected to train with them or play in the reserves with some of them. And a great learning experience. Our manager at the time was Steve McMahon, who was part of the Liverpool Championship winning team in the late 80s, early 90s, and was the player manager of the first team. So we had a really good footballing upbringing. Just as I turned 18, they weren't going to give me a contract to stay. So I had to go out on trial to about 17 or different clubs to try and make it stick. I was a defender by trait, and I wasn't the biggest. I'm 6 foot in size, but I was very lean, a lot leaner than I am now as I was going through. But I joined Torquay on a short-term deal. Met Leon Hapgood, who since actually followed me over and took the reins of Calgary Foothills now as a technical director. Played there shortly, Yeovil Town shortly, and my parents sat me down and just said, "Look, Tommy," he said, "you're a good player, but I think you need to start preparing for life beyond the game, just in case it doesn't all pan out." And I looked at them. I'm like, I'm going to make it as a pro here. I'm going to keep on going. And fortunately, I had some opportunities to take a scholarship out in the States. I had Boston University. I think there was Carolina, Florida State, and about 3 or 4 others. And I just turned 19, and I looked at it. I weighed up the pros and cons, and I still had the firm belief that I was going to, still make it in England, as I guess every player growing up in England did. It didn't quite pan out. So, I took the words of my parents wisely and went back to university, continued to play semi-pro, became a postman to put myself through university. So was up at 4:30 in the morning to start work at 5 a.m. Did my mail round, then went off to university, then trained and played semi-pro, and I studied for a degree in sports science and coaching. So that started to get my feet on the ground for being a coach as well. And my father was still a coach. He was at Swindon Town. Then he moved to Exeter City. And it was when he moved to Exeter City that he met a Canadian director called Michael Van Dale. And he had just invested in Exeter City. And he got to know my dad and got to see him on his visits over. And he said, "Look, if ever you think of changing your career," he said, "I'm really impressed with watching your work." He said, "I've got this club. I'm just launched in the USL leagues. Maybe come over and give us a visit." And my dad is a bit of a nomad himself, and he was just going through a divorce with my mum and decided to give it a go. So he came over. I went backpacking to try and set my tone before I went off on my next journey. I was 22 at the time, and it was either I was going to become a sports scientist and coach for Wimbledon, who were then in the Premier League. I was talking to them, and I had an opportunity to play professionally out in Finland, carry on playing semi-professionally back home in England, and see how it grew. And then my dad said, look, why don't you stop by and see what's happening here? It's a fantastic environment. And sure enough, I paid a visit, and the owner sat me down as well and said, look, how would you like to, stay and play and help us launch our community program? And sure enough, that offer to do, I never went back. I played 2 seasons for the Calgary Storm. And when the club folded, I realized that I felt at home here, and I thought, I could be a journeyman footballer. I knew I was never going to be a Premier League footballer. I was never going to be that good. But I knew I could offer something to the game, and I carried on my coaching licenses. And I said when it folded, I then started up a different academy, and I think it was in 2007 I joined the Calgary Foothills soccer program.
Yeah, and then once you joined them too, you went from literally being an assistant technical director from 07 to 08 to being the technical director from 08 to 2015. And then from there, you spent the last couple of years, of course, the head coach there of the Foothills. Take us through that journey, obviously. It was a big chunk of your time. It's kind of, I think a lot of fans, besides, seeing you with Cavalry, that's kind of where they kind of feel at home, where they see you the most is from your time from Cavalry or from Foothills FC. It's where they kind of know you, associate you with through that whole process. And of course, I think at the same time, if I'm not mistaken, you were assistant coach for the U17 Canada team, correct?
Yeah, under Sean Fleming. He was great, and it's interesting because I said this after him after picking up the Coach of the Year award, and I looked to my left at Tristan Borges, and he was part of the 1998 crop that we coached for Canada. And then, and Marco Carducci, got the VW Premier and the Golden Glove Award. He wasn't at the awards then. And then I thought, actually, Sean Fleming had his fingerprints on all 3 of us because I was his assistant. Tristan Borges played for Sean, and Marco Carducci was his captain at the U17 World Cup in 2013, I think it was.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a bit of a neat story that, Sean's a great Canadian coach. He's become a good friend of mine. We're only not friends when we're competing on opposite benches, but he's done a wonderful job for the Canadian game. I'm very thankful for the time I got to spend with him and Patrick Tobo and Randy Gregg, the Oilers legend. It was a great coaching staff and really helped me on my journey. But, prior to that, the reason I joined Calgary Foothills is it had this boutique nature with already a little bit of history, and we don't have a ton of great Canadian soccer history because we had, we had Kevin McKenna had come out of the club, captain of Canada. You had Owen Hargreaves, that was our most famous export. And they had some talent, but there was only about 350 kids at the club at the time. And Graham Kennedy, the then technical director, he's now Saint FX men's and women's head coach. He said, look, come across, we're trying to do something here. And I sat down with him and a gentleman called Danny Hay, who's the executive director at Calgary Foothills. And I said, look, you've got this playing background there. You seem to be an eager coach. I'd started launching these British invasion camps where I was bringing over some coaches from overseas, much in the same way I had, and just putting on something different that the kids weren't used to here in Calgary. And he sat down and said, look, we want to really grow it. What's your thoughts? So I said, yeah, no problem. So I liked what they were trying to do. They wanted to be a significant youth club and fill the gap where we didn't have a professional academy. And literally within 12 months of taking the assistant role, Graham said, look, I've got an offer to go back to where he's from, which is in Nova Scotia. He said, he was replacing Lou Bellick, who's, now the Rookie of the Year for U Sports. That's award's named. So he was filling some rather large shoes. So I took on the role. And I think, the first thing I thought was, right, I need somebody alongside me here to accompany the direction and leadership that Danny Hay was providing. To grow it. And I brought across Leon Hapgood, who I'd met briefly in my times at Torquay United, because football's a 6 degree of separation. It's probably even smaller. And we just set about and said, right, let's build this from grassroots to greatness. And we wanted to start at the bottom and build the best U8, U10, U12 skills program, whilst also managing and helping out the other older groups that were currently there and helping them get into university. And we literally put down a set of 5-year goals, right? What do we want to achieve in these next 5 years, right? We want to have a really solidified academy. Then I think we were one of the first clubs to bring in sports science to help improve the athletic side as well as the technical side. Then we won national championships in, I think it was we won double. First one was in 07, then we won again in 08, then we won it. And then suddenly now we started having success in our competition, but also success in our exporting, that we were getting, both male and females into the university world. And the only gap that we felt was missing was, right, we don't really have a professional pipeline. So if our players on the male side didn't have an EU passport, or they weren't selected by Vancouver Whitecaps, then they were just going to become, professionals in another world. So there'd be a dentist, or they'd study engineering, or they'd study, in kinesiology, and that was great. They'd probably get paid more than they would through soccer nowadays, anyway. But that we noticed at 15 or 16, it started to plateau off as they went to university. So again, we sat down for our next 5-year challenge. I think this was in 2012, 2013, said, right, we need to build that bridge. What's that bridge? Because we couldn't afford to go out as a youth club and buy a professional club, and we weren't ready, to be honest. So we said, look, I knew the USL through playing in it. I could see underneath it was the PDL system that was really great for the NCAA schools, who would put their top players who would get drafted into the MLS, and thought, this is great competition. So we had an exhibition year in 2014 and played the Whitecaps under 23s, played FC Edmonton's academy and first team mixed. And we're starting to get, 400-500 people out to watch. We thought this was good. So we bought the franchise, and in 2015, I think we finished middle of the pack. We had Seattle Sounders, Timbers, and who was the other one in our group, and it was a really competitive league. And in 2016, we had this great run and went all the way to the final. It was like a Cinderella story. Nobody expected of us. And now we were getting Canadian players competing at a really high level. And then we had, right, what's next? How can we then get them into the pros? So, it was just an incredible journey that took us through to 17 and 18. And we're actually in the midst of trying to buy a USL, or getting an ownership group to buy the USL side. And we were approached by the Vancouver Whitecaps to take on, what was their WFC2. It was going to be an element of a collaboration because they needed to move out of market. And it ended up going down to Fresno. And the only reason being is, Canada Soccer said, actually, we're launching or helping support a Canadian Premier League. And we won't be sanctioning any, new out-of-province franchises in American leagues because we want to grow our own.
Makes sense, right? You want to build the pyramids of success,
course.
Right, in Canada. So that totally makes sense to me. Going back to the time with the Foothills, were there any players? Because there's some names that are now is from the Foothills. Yeah. Were there any players, whether they're on the Cavs or not? Were there any players that, watching them kind of develop and grow, you're like, man, like that guy's really good. This guy's going to go somewhere. This guy's going to be something special. Any of those players, any of those names kind of bounce out of you when you think about that?
Yeah, I think just as we were getting to the early, I guess it was like chapter 1 or 2 of our 5-year plan, where, Paul Hamilton graduated. He was in 1988. He went and played for FC Edmonton, became a fan favorite for 2 years. Then he went down to, I think it was Carolina, and then the buck stopped there. And then Michael Cox was the next, who's now at York 9, and we went down to Orlando City as well. Charlie Trafford is another one that played overseas in Holland, Finland, and is now with Inverness Callies. Played for the men's national team a couple of times as well. He's playing in Scotland in the Championship. Sam Adekubi is another one that popped out, and we went, this boy is lightning quick, and he was a winger at the time. And we converted his position to more of an attacking left back. And before he went to the Whitecaps, said, listen, just consider that, as you go higher up the level, you've got to be prepared to alter your position, because when you get to that level, everybody's an attacking player, or everyone's an attack-minded player when they're playing in their youth. And he took it on board and went out and done, some really good things. And, now he's playing in the top flight in Norway, as well as, in the national group. So we started to have this emergence of players. So what we ended up doing is, it wasn't just, Foothills is that club that had Owen Hargreaves or Kevin McKenna. We wanted new age icons. And suddenly this next wave of Charlie Traffords, of Sam Adekubi, started to become it. And then as that's now started to evolve, the Canadian Premier League has brought forward this next generation of, Dominic Zators, of Elijah Adekubis, Marco Carducci's, of local Calgary-based players because, in fairness to Marco Carducci, he only played one season for us in the PDL with Calgary Foothills. Prior to that, he was with Calgary Villains before joining the Whitecaps program.
So, and then with that too, obviously with the Foothills, you've had a bunch of great names there. You found a bunch of great success there, and then from there, of course, you move on to 2018. You're kind of wrapping things up, maybe with the Foothills. Cavalry FC all of a sudden in May 2018 gets announced. And of course, there at the announcement of Cavs FC, you're actually the first head coach GM in the CPL's history, which is a pretty big deal. Were you connected with the club? But from really the very beginning stages, were you behind everything with the ownership group and really starting it all? How many years did it take?
Do you know what? I'll tell you another. I've got lots of little neat stories that one day I think we'll have to put it into a book or a biography because there's so many cool stories that occurred. So, back at the Foothills now, we were trying to, again, look into that. We were venturing into it, and CSA said, look, we're not approving any more American leagues. We're trying to help support the Canadian Premier League, and that's important because with the United 2026 bid on the horizon, it's important for Canada to have its own domestic league. So all the vision of Calgary Foothills that we wanted to do was help our part to change the landscape of Canadian soccer. So we thought by building teams. And so anyway, as that happened, I think it was around this time in 2017, so just before New Year's 2018. I then get a follow-up call on, I think it was Boxing Day, from Scott Mitchell, who's the CEO of Canada Soccer Business. That's the business side behind it. And he said, Tommy, just ran into Victor Montagliani. He said, you've probably heard that something's happened where I think he was in Maui at the time. Strange, bizarre twist. They'd connected, and he said, look, I hear you're the guy to talk to help us go down the path of, getting something in Calgary. He said, hey, you're the soccer brains in that part of the world. I said, well, I'd like to think I can help. I said, because here's the story. We're trying to get professional soccer brought to Calgary again. I think we're ready. We've got now an infrastructure to help support it. And the soccer community, not just Calgary Foothills, is ready. He said, okay, look, I'm going to send out, Paul Byrne will be reaching out to you. He said, and we'll send you out. So myself, Danny Hay, and Mike McCusker were board members of the Foothills at the time, and a gentleman by the name of Lorenzo DiCicco. We sat down and said, look, okay, well, clearly this is a youth club now. Now we need to go out to investors. So Scott Mitchell, being part of the Ticats group as well, and the CFL, knew of the Flames Sports and Entertainment Group because they own Stampeders, they own the Calgary Flames, they own the Roughnecks. So the first port of call was, look, let's meet with them to see if they're interested. And you're the soccer, they're the business, and let's see where it goes. So sure enough, those meetings happened. The Flames group were interested, but at the same time, we're trying to push through the Calgary Next project to build this great brand new stadium to change the sporting downtown landscape. So I said, look, if you can do all the work and do that and tell us what this will cost, we'd consider it. At the same time, Lorenzo DiCicco sat on the TELUS board, because that's where he's working, with Mrs. Linda Sudden Heathcott, who's the CEO and owner and chairman of Spruce Meadows, and said, well, of course we'll need a place to play. So perhaps I pitch it to them about, Spruce Meadows is this world-class, loads of grass everywhere, got some facilities. Perhaps they would consider maybe, being a venue for it. And we've got an ownership group venue. And so we met, I think it was literally that year in 2017. That year, I think it was at the Masters that we met, and I was walking on the grass at Spruce Meadows with Lorenzo and my wife, and met Linda for the first time. And my first comment on the international ring to her was, this is impressive grass. I said, have you ever played a soccer game here? And she says, no, but I'm sure, a 1,200-pound horse damage than a 170-pound athlete run over it. And I said, great. So then, sure enough, Lorenzo DiCicco followed up and said, look, the group here at Calgary want to meet. There's talks of this and carry it further. And within a week, she come back and said, listen, I don't want to just rent out this utilities, these places, but I'm interested in owning. And that was it. So this is, like I said, this was probably just on the late 2016, 17, and then going into the start of 2018. So we literally started working on what the logistics behind it would be, you know, what we needed to do is to build a team on the pitch, off the pitch. I then started flying in with Ian Allison to the ownership meetings on the very first one I think I was part of, just to find out, you know, what it's going to be, what the concept is, what the vision of it. And, you know, it was a really exciting moment and an opportunity for me personally to be part of the early stages.
That is a pretty cool thing to be literally from the ground up, and not even ground up.
From the ground up. Yeah.
You're literally person number one in with Cavalry. You know what I mean? Like you're literally the embodiment of what ended up growing into this brand, and that's now become this world, you know, emblem for this representing the city of Calgary. So I mean that's a pretty impressive story, and I love hearing stories like that too. I mean, like the kind of the behind the scenes, how it all started. I hope that somebody does a documentary somewhere, maybe at the 10-year anniversary of the league, because it's going to happen, of how it started. So you started doing these meetings. You got the call box into 2017. Fast forward, now you start doing the branding and all that. Were you guys officially locked in? Was it I believe it was early May, if I'm not mistaken, 2018. You guys got a FIFA approved kind of seal of approval to be officially a club. Was it around that time that you guys were locked in for the CPL, or was it like right before the announcement in May or months before?
Yeah, so I think what part of it then was there 2018 became a transitional phase for me personally, because I'd had, you know, just over 10 years, 11 years with Calgary Foothills, and I was very proud to help build that. As I was leaving, we went from 350 kids to 3,500 kids to you know, now we had a $11 million indoor field house that, you know, Danny Hay was a mastermind behind building it, but we'd literally helped change the landscape of Canadian soccer in our own way. We were contributing to the cause. So then what we agreed between Spruce Meadows and Calgary Foothills to say, look, let me finish my obligation, because I still felt that I wanted to see out one final year with the club, you know, to make sure that Leon Hapgood had everything he needed for the club to continue to be successful, as I handed over the keys to him to finish off the season with the PDL. Unfortunately, it was an absolutely perfect way to end my time with that club and become a full-time member of the Cavalry on September 1, I think it was, that I changed employment, if you will, to start growing. But I did it on the back of, you know, winning the national championship with the Calgary Foothills in the PDL.
When you built the 2018 Foothills, obviously you kind of already know in the back of your mind about the possibility, and pretty much at this point, you were assured that you're going to have a CPL club in Calgary. Did you kind of build the 2018 Foothills as kind of like a base of, you know, hey, if you come play with me in 2018, you know, there might be, you know, you're going to get a good look at a 2019 CPL spot? Is that kind of how you went along building 2018? Because you're in a really good position, if you think about it, right, to build a perfect team at that PDL level in 2018, because you can bring in players that you imagine would be CPL level players the following year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we weren't sure whether the CPL was going to launch. There was 3 dates put out, a full season in 2018, which was, you know, the first one bandied around that just wasn't enough time, 2019 or even 2020. So I had to be careful how I staggered things. So the players that I had, so I look at Marco Carducci as a prime example. He was, you know, second choice for Houston Dynamo's farm team with RGV. He wasn't getting much playing time. And I said, look, you know, there is a CPL coming now. That's confirmed. How many teams? I don't know. When it will launch, I can't confirm. I said, but what is clear, you need games. I said, so we've got games to provide. We were doing a trip to England to go and test the resolve of the players. We were taking on the PDL championship with a view to seeing how we could do and what players. They were almost doing a season-long audition. And then we had a an El Clasico prospect series between FC Edmonton and ourselves. And I look at it, and we didn't take all the players. We actually, I look at Nathan Ingham. He was with us for a short time, ended up being Y9's goalkeeper. Ali Musi now ended up being with his hometown in Winnipeg with Valor. You look at Bruno Zebi, he was part of that squad. He went on to play there, and and then you've got Jackson Farmer and Jordan Haynes, who didn't quite make the CPL, but went on to UBC, and Willie Akiao went down to NCAA, and then the rest, just came with us. And it was interesting because as I started signing the players, the first thing people were saying, well, that's just PDL 2.0. He's just taken with him Dominic Zator, Elijah Adakubi, Chris Evans, Dean Northovers. It just became familiar, and they thought they're going to struggle because PDL to CPL is two different things. And I agreed, but I knew the quality of these players as both players, but as people. And I sat down with Ian Allison, our club president, and Martin, assistant, said, let's look at we feel locally, because it's important, needs to represent us. Who do we feel is deserving of that chance to come with us? So we sat down and said, let's look at the locals first. Then we said, right, as it's a Canadian Premier League, which Canadian nationals do we think can really click the upgrade for us and provide leadership and play in the pros? So Mason Trafford was one. Maro Stakil was another. Nico Giantsopoulos was our second goalkeeper that we thought could come and compete with Marco. And then beyond that, we said, now we've got this really great core of Canadians that we feel will represent the way we want to play football, represent the way we want our brand to be carried on the field and off it. Now we need to top up with the international spots. Which positions don't we have? So centre forward was a key one. We brought in Jordan Brown and Dominic Malonga. A left back was a rarity. So Nathan Mavilla came in. We wanted another box-to-box midfielder. So Julian Boucher came in. We wanted another winger. So Jose Escalante came in. So I think for us was just we wanted to fill in holes with some internationals and make them exciting. And I think we did that.
Yeah, no, I think you guys, 100%. I think you guys were one of the most well-built clubs in the league, hands down. In year one, clearly, I mean, it showed in the results there. How big of a boost was, especially in that start of the season, to have that core be Foothills players. I thought coming into last season, the 2019 season, I really felt like you guys had that edge, especially in that spring season, because you had that chemistry. I mean, you had the core of Foothills players coming in there. They've played together just the year prior and won a championship under the same coach just the year prior. Mm-hmm. So how big of almost like a step forward were you guys ahead of all the competition? Do you really feel like that chemistry part, that Foothills kind of connection was a big boost to you guys getting that kind of jump start over everybody else?
I felt it for me because I knew what we were getting. But you can also look at it's interesting because, again, when we named this side, a lot of outsiders went, it's just locals. They'll be okay. They'll be competitive. And then, but you look at it, Forge in their own way did something similar with a lot of their Sigma graduates. And then between both us now, when we started having success, a lot of it was deemed towards, they've got players. But if you look at corporate mergers, for example, because I like to study people, if you bring 50%, which was about what we brought through at Foothills, if you bring 50% of one group and then 50% of a new group, internationals coming in, and you have to evolve, plus a new ownership group and a new way of doing things, it can have the recipe of success, which we made it, or the recipe for disaster, because now you brought through, you've took a big gamble. But we made it work because we were big believers in teaching culture and leadership and looking at the people first, and that was huge. You also look, Pacific signed a lot of ex-Whitecaps players. They all played together in the WFC 2 or academy. So they had a similar start. FC Edmonton are the longest going professional club and looked upon players that had played with or against and a lot of their academy. So they too had a similar starting point. Rob Gale used a lot of his U20 players through his system at Canada. So he actually had a head start over some of the names that we didn't know and was able to bring in. And then, you could argue that Jimmy knew a fair bit of the Toronto crowd. but they didn't quite have the names of people we had. And then Stephen Hart was out on the island trying to build it. But, hindsight is good when you look back. But there was also challenges we had. We just were the ones that were very, very clear with what we wanted to achieve, used any benefit we had to get going. And in the first 11 games we had, 7 of them were won by 1-goal games. And that was just down to our preparation. We really did a lot of work in our preseason to get the team ready. Because like I said, it could have been a cultural masterpiece, or it could have been a cultural nightmare. Fortunately, we turned it into the former.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys, and like you did say, a lot of those 7, I think it was 7, the stat you said there were 7 wins there at the start of the spring season were by 1-goal games. And I did feel throughout the season, too, a big part of the reason why, I had you for most part of the season as a team that was going to win it all, literally, was because I just felt you guys had something. Just right off the bat, you guys were just a little bit different when you watched the games. That even if you were down a goal, you just felt they're going to come back and at least get a draw or get a win. I just felt you guys had that kind of like that, mentality, that kind of edge to it. And I think a big part of that came from the Foothills base of players, those core players, and I'm growing into what Cavalry FC was. And you guys found that success. You got that edge. I never ever thought at any point of any match you guys were ever gonna lose. I mean, obviously it's a possibility for anybody, but I just thought, just watching you guys play and the way that no matter what, even if you had a bad first half, you just somehow always came back and pulled out a result. And I just I have tons of respect for a coach and for a system like that, especially in a new league where there's so many intangibles and X factors, and you didn't know any better really of what the level would be, for you guys, and for you specifically, by the way, to just be able to build a team like that. I thought it was amazing, and that's why I think I'm a big believer that you definitely deserve the Coach of the Year honor in 2019, because you, hands down, to me, built probably arguably the best team on paper in this CPL.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at our opponents. I think we're probably the most consistent. I think that's the good thing, because you can look at 2 ways, and you can flip a coin and say, well, should Bobby have won it because he won the North Shield trophy? Should we won it because we won the league? And for me, I was brought up on, consistency over a long time, because over a 2-legged, we beat Whitecaps over 2 legs. We lost to Montreal over 2 legs, and, had the second game had the goal on our favor, we'd have knocked them out on away goals. So it was fine margins, but we never really were out of. I think we only had 3 league losses leading into the final games. We didn't lose out much. We didn't lose by big blowouts. We were the most consistent over the 28 league games and cup competition. We played the most out of anybody. But again, credit to Forge. They were deserving of the trophy. We had things that didn't go our way in the finals with the send-ins off, and we couldn't buy a goal. But I think that probably keeps us humble, because it keeps us coming back for more. We wanted to. We treated it like a treble: spring season, fall season, right, and the North Shield trophy. I think that's how it's got to be looked at. It's 3 different competitions. We didn't want to take our foot off the gas in the fall. We wanted to compete for it and give the league the credit it's deserved. I'm not a believer in, I think every single game should matter, and we approach it that way. I think our cup run was remarkable. I look at now and I reflect back now that the season's done, and I look at what we actually did with arguably 10% of the salary that Whitecaps had. And we played them over 2 games, and they didn't beat us over 2 games. And I think that's remarkable. We went to Montreal and we were popped off the park and finished with the game with 10 men, but managed to come out there with a 2-1 deficit with the second game open. Even in the final, when we're down to 10 men against Forge, we only kept it at 1 goal. We could have folded the tent. But I think sometimes you've got to take that little bit of adversity to overcome and grow further. We don't see 2019 as that's it, we're done. We see it as an opportunity now to, okay, that's what we got to. These were the challenges we had, and this is the adversity we have to go again. And we're looking forward to 2020 because we feel we want to be the ones lifting the shield this time.
Yeah, and go back to what you said too about the blowouts part. Thanks. I'm in Winnipeg. I'm a Valerson ticket holder, so thank you again for that Labor Day Monday 8-0 win. I still have bad dreams about it, by the way.
Well, and you know, and I like Robby. Robby and I actually, became friends over the course because funny enough, I replaced his position as U17, one of the assistant coaches, as he moved to the 20s. But we ended up doing our UEFA A licenses together. So we did it, and I think in 2015 we actually there's a situation for your final exam where you actually have to coach against each other, and we kind of had a laugh with it and just said, yeah, imagine when this gets for real. So, fortunately, I had the upper hand on him this year, but I know Robby's a competitor, and I know he's going to be coming back to make payback for the games we had this year. But, I felt bad for him afterwards, but, I enjoyed our guys because on the back of that, actually, we'd had 7 games in 21 days, and that was our roughest part of the season. We'd had Montreal, we'd had Halifax, and we'd won 1 game in 7. We tied 3. Lost to Montreal twice, and I think we'd had another loss in there as well. And it was a tough time. That was our adversity, but we came out of it. We had a few days, we recharged, and unfortunately, Valor were on the back end of our pent-up frustrations.
With that there, you talked about the success you had too with the Canadian Championship in 2019. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to, just as we're recording this interview, for people who don't know, this is recorded on the 18th of December. So earlier today, the Canadian Championship 2020 bracket was just dropped. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but what do you think about your odds here for Cavalry in 2020? Obviously, we for sure will have at least one CPL club in the semifinals again, which is really cool. But obviously, got Valor versus Forge FC. 2 clubs, one team maybe looking for redemption, and Valor, another club there in Forge FC that for me was your biggest rivals in 2019. Which one of the 2 would you rather face, do you think, in 2020 in that next round?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's an interesting draw because what it's done now is it's put the first round kind of based on geography, and I think the next one was because of we had a great run. We were in the early rounds last year, and it was funny because we had to go early rounds all the way in because of administration, because we were registered in 2018 versus say Valor, Hamilton, and
Edmonton.
It was at Edmonton were registered in 2017 as pro clubs. So we just got on with it, made it through, went on this great run. We beat Pacific home and away, we beat Forge home and away, beat Whitecaps home and away, and then got to Montreal, and it was an incredible run to be part of. Now we've been rewarded through that by being in the quarterfinals, which is neat. I think, you look at Forge. Cup football is different from the league. We had the cup win there, and Forge had the championship win. So they're going to be tough opponents no matter what because they're doing it. But I wouldn't write Valor off because I think Valor now they know where the league's at. Rob's a smart guy and he knows where he needs to improve. So I think any team that goes. But what it does do, it gives us an opportunity to play against a team in our league to again get into the semi-finals, which back-to-back years would be very impressive. So. We're happy with it, but we know it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, and then from there, of course, for other people who haven't seen it, the other quarterfinal matchup, I believe, is FC Edmonton Pacific FC, and then I think there's Cavalry, like you said, is the only team that does get that bye into the quarterfinals there. And obviously, with future years coming on, I believe I read an article a couple weeks ago. You were saying about the Canadian Championship, how you wanted to add more clubs to it, including possibly even semi-professional clubs. Are you looking at, do you feel like it'd be good to include, like the TFC2s and the Foothills and their and Highlanders and WSA Winnipeg? Do you think it'd be a good move to add those semi-pro clubs into the tournament like this?
I think so. I'll tell you what you do, because we've already got the National Amateur Championship. So, the winner of each province then goes into, and I know it's all on a one trip, so you're reducing the cost. But I think what we have to do is in order to keep growing, because we're in a golden era of Canadian football. I really believe that. I think we can capitalize it now with the markets, the media's covering now. Wouldn't it be great? Because I know Media Pro's been brilliant in getting the rights to Canadian football, but they've also shown they're willing to share it, and they've shared out to CBC. But you imagine now if CBC or Sportsnet or TSN or whoever said, right, we want the rights to Canadian Championship, because last year it wasn't just us. It was, you look at Blainville, they gave York 9 a great game. Then York 9 went on to play Montreal and should have won the first leg and lost by a penalty in the second. The Ottawa Fury and Halifax games were fantastic. So it's a great cup competition. I think to have that, shared across all of the Canadian platforms would be great. But you also give a great buy-in. I firmly believe that I think if these amateur clubs win their provinces, there's got to be like a seeding round, and it happens in the US Open Cup, which we played against teams in the PDL that were part of it, that were playing USL sides and then MLS sides. I grew up in a country that had the FA Cup. I think the Germans have the German Cup as well. And what it does is these early sides, post a bond. I'm sure sponsors now would then say, okay, if you threw your post a bond up front to make sure you're eligible to play in the tournament. If you do that, then you've taken care of your business. If you go on and get into the later rounds, then I'm guaranteeing every club would make it happen to be there. If they go on a run, they would find players from somewhere. It would happen. But you make it early rounds and you do exactly what I think you're seeing currently, where it's geography based. So if you're in Alberta now and the Alberta AMSL League, to use it as an example, won the nationals, then they would get into the won the provincials. They would get into preliminary rounds, and then maybe they face off against, say, Calgary Foothills, because that's a USL 2 team now, face off, and then that winner then gets through to the next round. And I think that's how you do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good good idea to have. Obviously, it's perfect. It kind of branches the semi-professional to the professional branches of teams, which is great. And of course, I'd imagine that we get probably about 3 more teams possibly in 2021 there into the CPL. Hopefully, at least, including possibly an Ottawa team in the next couple of years, which would be great. But along with that, of course, going back now to the Cavalry's 2019 season, as a whole, it was a success. And like I said earlier in the video too, I do like to hear some of the behind the scenes things. Was there any players in 2019 that, when you're talking last winter to some players, were there any players you wanted to sign that you just missed out
on? Not really. I'd spoken with Ali Musi, because he'd played for us, and Rob Gale, and we talked about there. I said that where the player needs to go is where his heart tells him, and he said he wanted to try playing for his hometown. So we said no problem, and let's get on with it, and moved on. I think that was it. I don't think there was any other players really that jumped out and gone, "Oof, I'd wish I'd had that one," because I think we were very diligent when how we did our recruitment, and there's a ton of players out there. So because we ticked off the box with local and Canadians early, we weren't in a rush then to get any more Canadians. So then we focused on the international market, and there was a lot of good international players out there that are now still playing overseas that we'd gained an interest, but no one really missed out on that. I think probably the biggest one that people will talk about is Easton Ongaro, because we selected him in round 3, and we brought him to Dominican Republic. Again, sat down with Jeff Paulus, Martin Nash, and Sean Fleming, because we were all there at the same time, and they turned and said, "Listen, we've had a deal go through on a striker that we're looking to bring in. We've got Tommy, we've got Diuk, and we're looking at another one. If he's not in your plans, would you consider?" And we said, "Look." Martin and I went away from it and said, "Look, we've got Jordan Brown, he came in and he was lights out, and this is a kid that had a great upbringing in England, and Don Malonga, great experience. And because we play a single striker in the front 3, I think what we looked at was we didn't see him getting ahead of them, and so I think for us was we've said, look, let's do what's right for the Canadian game. We brought in Gabby Batar, who we thought was a different type of player." And we didn't sit, and he didn't play much. So I think had Easton stayed with us, maybe he'd have played, maybe he'd have scored the goals, maybe he wouldn't have, because he found joy in a twin striker role, and credit to the lad. And I think that's the one people ask me the most about. But I said, I think we just did what was right for the game and for the lad to play for his local team.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good story there. Obviously, a lot of people, the what ifs now moving forward, depending on what Easton now accomplishes at FC Edmonton. A lot of people. Everyone always sees how it is now when they look back like, man, you could have had him. It's like, yeah, but if you would have had him, you could have just sat on the bench and never played. Never would have become the player he is today. So, I guess you can almost if you would like, you can almost just take a little bit of credit for the reason why he was so successful. It's like you could be like, well, we had him, but we let him go.
Yeah, an assist. Yeah, only if he scores a winner against us, I think I'll be pissed. But other than that, no, he's a good kid. He's a really good kid, and I go back to why I got involved in all this. I'm a proud Canadian now. I feel like I've been adopted by a country that's accepted me and a city that's embraced me. My wife and kids are Canadian, so when I think of the greater picture, it's all about giving back to a country that's really given me a lot. So it's an easy decision for me. If this kid's not going to play and we're not going to maximize his benefits, then make him good for the league.
When you're looking back now at 2019, looking ahead to 2020, if there was a position there that you felt that the club was maybe lacking in a bit that you wanted to prove on, what's that position, do you think?
For us to prove on, I think we just want to keep growing. I think credit to our club and our fans. I think we had about 1,500, 1,600 season ticket holders from the get-go that were buying into a concept. Our stadium's packed. It's 6,000. So when you have we make 6,000 sound like 10,000. I think the stadium is phenomenal. Our foot soldiers are something else because it's loud and proud, and you've seen that on the games that you've watched. But I think for us, so now we've got a product. Now we've shown we're not just a concept, and we're exciting to watch. So for us, we want to have larger crowds at home. We want to make it more accessible for the community and the foot soldiers and the families and corporate market. But I think what we want to keep doing is now what's next. So if I've got more players that are gaining attention, which is part and parcel of the league, we're an export league. We have to accept that. If you're not part of the 4 big leagues in the world, Italy, Spain, England, Germany, you're an export league. So if we move players on and up, then we've got to be able to bring through the next crop. And unfortunately, I'm hoping that, this crop of Calgarians that I've been able to bring through, and from not just the Calgary Foothills, but other community soccer clubs in the city, that we can do the same again and have the next batch. So whether it's Dominic Zator and Marco Carducci's that are moving on and up, then we've got to be able to replace them with as good players, and that's how we keep populating the pipeline as we all work towards 2026 and the World Cup.
Yeah, that's real well put. Obviously, it's a development league, like you said, an export league, and this is what the league is about. It's a beautiful thing. But I want to thank you, Tommy, for being here on the show this week. I really appreciate it. It's always great to have a coach on, but it's even better sometimes, just a little bit better, to have the inaugural Coach of the Year on. It's a nice little thing to end the year on. So thank you guys for everyone watching too. This is the last video of the 2019 calendar year for my channel. So thank you guys. I hope I could get back by getting you the best coach in the CPL. Clearly, he is the Coach of the Year. So thank you, Tommy, for coming on. Hope to have you on hopefully in 2020.
Well, I appreciate you letting me tell some stories. I've got a lot of them. So listen, thanks for doing your part to grow the game. We're all in it together. So all the best. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone.